Now, the next topic is Digital Economy 2019 report for Vietnam. And please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Raphael Cieslowski, Industry Sales Head from Google.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I realize I'm probably the second last, and you guys want to get to the gala. I also have some heavy slides. There's quite a lot of charts in there, but the objective of today is to really take you through a report that was published by Google about 2 weeks ago, and it's something we do on an annual basis. So this is the 4th version of the report, and it's a collaboration with Temasek, Bain, and Google, and it's all about the digital economy, how it is today, and how we see it going forward. If we look at the methodology, it really encompasses our own data, Temasek research data, Bain analysis, and then a whole bunch of industry experts, interviews, and a whole source of third-party research. So today what I'm going to take you through is where Southeast Asia is, how it will progress into 2025, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into Vietnam and what we see in Vietnam as some of the key growth sectors. So the scope for this is really Southeast Asia, 570 million consumers, 6 countries. This doesn't include the likes of Cambodia, Laos. It's really the core SCA markets. 5 sectors. We've added financial services because financial services in several markets in Southeast Asia have reached an inflection point, and you can really start to see significant growth. That for Vietnam is probably the next big pillar of growth, which we'll go into a little bit detail. So it really covers e-commerce, media, ride-hailing, and travel. And as we look at total Southeast Asia, what we've done is we've added 100 million internet users over the last 4 years. We also know that in the next 15 years, 150 million consumers will turn 15 plus. And for that, that's a little bit of a proxy for us for new online users coming on board. We also know that Southeast Asia has the most engaged mobile population in the world. So where are we today? The Southeast Asia internet economy has reached 100 billion. It's projected to reach 300 billion by the year 2025. It's also increased 60 billion versus last year's report. And this is on the back of robust funding and consumer behavior across the region. What we also see is Southeast Asia starting to close the gap at GMV as a percentage of GDP. So we're actually starting to catch up to developed markets. You can see the progression from 1.3% to 3.7%, and then 2025 is looking at 8.5%. What we also see is of the 360 million people that are online today, only half are actually using the digital economy today. So if you put access aside, 1 in 2 consumers still haven't adopted digital economy services. If you add access on top of that, the pie just gets even bigger. So acquisition and headroom is huge. Looking at who's driving growth, it's clearly Indonesia and Vietnam. This is a key factor going forward because if you'll see later, on the funding side, on the growth side, Indonesia and Vietnam are clearly driving the pace. And even if the government rebases GDP for 2019, Vietnam will still be approximately 4.7, 4.8% here. So Indonesia and Vietnam going forward are going to have much faster growth in the internet economy. What does that mean? Today, Vietnam's internet economy is 12 billion. In 2025, it'll be 43 billion. What's driving that? We'll get into a little bit of detail, but you'll see here, Vietnam is clearly punching above its weight. Arguably, Thailand has a much stronger GDP, but going into 2025, you'll see the growth rates on Vietnam significantly growing stronger. And it will be the second fastest growing market behind Indonesia. On the back of that, Vietnam is the 3rd most funded market in Southeast Asia. So combined with the growth rate, funding, what we used to say is it's really Singapore and Indonesia driving their digital economy in Southeast Asia, and then the rest. Going forward, it's super clear now that it's going to be Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and then the rest. And that is super, super clear when we look at funding, when we look at growth, and we just look at consumer behavior and adoption. The other thing we see here is $24 billion invested in Southeast Asia's unicorns. You'll see V&G there. More importantly, what you'll see is there's 70 aspiring unicorns in Southeast Asia who have generated $5 billion in investment. And you'll see there Tiki and Sendo. And you'll see later on also how e-commerce is really booming and driving the growth for Vietnam. So what do we see in e-commerce? What you'll see here is e-commerce is driving the growth. So 81% growth from 2015-2019 CAGR, and 49% CAGR expected from today to 2025. We also know there's heated competition between Tiki, Sendo, and some of the regional players, and this will just continue. On top of that, ride-hailing has a lot of headroom. We saw the Grab numbers today. If we look at getting more drivers on board, getting into rural, getting into all sorts of services around food, this is going to drive aggressive growth going forward. So what we see e-commerce is plus $3 billion per year for the next 6 years. And that is really, really driving the core growth in the Vietnam digital economy. If we think about it also from our perspective, I'm sure we all shop online. We're all familiar with the online festivals. I think two key factors here that are very different in Southeast Asia is shopping and entertainment. In the Western world, it's really add to basket, buy, get out. In Southeast Asia, there's a lot of gamification, live chat. People spend much more time on the e-commerce sites and really enjoy it. The other thing that's happening is next day and same day delivery. Why this is important? Because it unlocks new categories and increases basket size. So if you can guarantee delivery in 2 hours or in a day, you suddenly can start looking at groceries on top of other goods. The other thing we're seeing on ride-hailing is transportation, food, and loyalty. I think it's pretty clear that GoViet and Grab know that if you start to use their service for both ride and foods, it drives stickiness. You can start to create interesting loyalty programs and incentives. And this is only going to continue to grow as they get more drivers on board, as they get more partners on board, and as they start to drive reach and coverage across more provincial and rural areas. So if we look at the next one, financial services has really started to reach an inflection point in a lot of markets. I would say Vietnam's a little bit behind some of the other markets like Indonesia, but the opportunity here is huge. If you look at Vietnam, there's 49 million unbanked users, 7 million underbanked users, and 15 million banked users. So 3 in 4 people in Southeast Asia arguably have insufficient funds. What does that mean? That means digital payments looks like it will be $1 trillion by 2025. A huge opportunity going forward in both payments, digital payments, and then e-wallets. If you break that further down into Vietnam, digital payments will drive the growth from now to 2025, and we'll start to look at 96 billion, remittance 3.9 billion, and then lending with a huge CAGR going up to 14.2 billion. So it's really going to be payments and lending going into 2025 that's going to drive a lot of this growth for Vietnam in digital financial services. What we also see is the ecosystem. I think we can all understand that funding will stay robust in Southeast Asia despite global headwinds. Consumer trust is improving. More people are starting to use e-commerce, use ride-hailing, payments, so naturally they're becoming more familiar with digital. Talent is a big problem, we know that. I think on our side, brand side, agency side, creative media, there's a lot of work to be done on training, and the government, I think, also is leaning in on Innovation 4.0 or Digital 4.0 and how we can look at training the future talent of Vietnam. The other one is logistics and payments a little bit, but logistics specifically, if you look at the e-commerce boom, a lot of point players have emerged and ecosystems have built themselves around other ecosystems, last mile logistics, for example. And this is something that will only continue to improve going forward. I think the big thing here for Vietnam to consider is how brands want to partner here. Because I would argue that on the one side, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's also a lot of risk going forward on business models. So how do you stay curious? How do you start testing? How do you think about your business model in the next 5 years? How do you really think about who you want to partner with, what type of relationships you want to build? And it could be anywhere from data to logistics, offline, online. And that's a key factor going forward as we look at Vietnam. So I think the key takeaways from an SCA perspective is really the internet economy has hit 100 billion, projection has increased, and this is great for Southeast Asia, linked to funding, linked to consumer behavior, and it could potentially grow even stronger. Indonesia and Vietnam are pulling away from the pack from a growth perspective, and it's super clear that from a funding growth perspective, key markets, it's now Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and then the rest. There's still a sizable opportunity in rural, and I think as access improves, as some of these e-commerce players and ride-hailing players start to drive coverage into rural areas, this will only drive more growth. Digital services will reach an inflection point in Vietnam very soon, if not already. It already has in markets like Singapore and Indonesia. And I think the other big one is really funding. So we do not see a significant slowdown in funding across Southeast Asia despite global headwinds. And this is a great thing for Southeast Asia. So I think in summary, now is a great time to be in Vietnam, especially in the next 6 years. I think everyone feels the energy. There are a huge amount of opportunities as businesses look at their business models going forward. I think we heard FE Credit, we heard Grab. There are partnerships today happening from a data perspective, from a logistics perspective. You can partner with Grab now to order your products from 7-Eleven and take it to the consumer. You could arguably also ask Grab to pick the product up from your distribution center and deliver it to a consumer. So there are opportunities and big opportunities going forward. Likewise with threats, but agility, curiosity, starting to think about your business models, starting to think about what the consumer experience is going to look like in the next 3 years, and planning for that is going to be critical in Vietnam. And I think everyone should be super optimistic and motivated because it only looks bright for Vietnam going forward, and we don't see a slowdown anytime soon. So that was a quick introduction, and this report is available online for anyone. If you want to have a deeper dive, you can reach out to your Google counterpart, and they can take you through a more detailed breakdown also of the report. So thank you very much. My name's Raphael, and don't forget to look this up online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raphael.